There is a moment recorded in the Muṇḍaka Upaniṣad that is easy to pass over too quickly. A great householder, the text calls him Mahāshala, a man named Śaunaka, comes to the forest hermitage of the sage Aṅgiras and asks a single question. He has already mastered what his world considered learning. He knows the Vedic hymns, the ritual codes, the grammar, the astronomy. He has built a life of substance and accomplishment, and yet something in him remains unsatisfied in the way that no further accumulation of information can address. So he approaches the sage with complete reverence and asks in effect, "What is the one thing by knowing which everything else is known?" It is a remarkable question, because it already contains within it the intuition that ordinary knowledge, however vast, does not converge on a final point of peace. Śaunaka does not know what he is looking for, but he knows that what he already has is not it. The sage Aṅgiras, one of the 7 great rishis of the Vedic tradition, does not answer immediately with content. His first move is to reframe the entire question. He says in Muṇḍaka Upaniṣad 1.1.4, Tasmai sahovaka, dve vidye viditavye, iti hasma yad brahma vido vadanti, parachai va aparacha. To him he said, there are 2 sorts of knowledge to be acquired. So those who know Brahman say, namely para and apara, the higher and the lower. Before any teaching begins, there is a classification. This is not pedagogical housekeeping. It is the central act of jnana yoga itself. The Sanskrit word jnana, in its deepest register, does not mean mere information. It designates a cognitive event that proves not to be mistaken, a knowing that has direct, non-mediated contact with its object. And the first thing that this kind of knowing does is distinguish. It sees the difference between what is genuinely real and what appears real. The Sanskrit term for this capacity is viveka, discriminative discernment, and Aṅgiras is performing viveka before Śaunaka's eyes, sorting all of human knowledge into 2. In Muṇḍaka 1.1.5, he names the lower category with specificity. Tatra apara, Rigvedo Yajurveda Samavedo Atharvaveda, Shiksa Kalbo Vyakaranam, Niruktam, Chando Yotisham iti. The Rigveda, the Yajurveda, the Samaveda, the Atharvaveda, phonetics, ritual science, grammar, etymology, meter, astrology, all of this is apara vidya, lower knowledge. Then asa para, yaya tadaksharam adhigamyate, and the higher is that by which the imperishable, akshara, Brahman is known. The list he places in the lower category is astonishing in its scope. He is not dismissing trivial things. He is classifying the entirety of formal human learning, including the 4 Vedas themselves, in their ritual and liturgical dimensions, as apara, the knowledge that cannot reach the final answer. Lower knowledge is always partial. It is acquired through perception and inference. It is subject to revision and negation. It gives tremendous utility, and it is not without value, but it cannot by its nature resolve the seeker's deepest question, because that question is not about information, it is about identity. This is where the Bhagavad Gītā enters, on a very different stage. Not a forest hermitage, a battlefield. The armies of the Pandavas and the Kauravas are arrayed on the plain of Kurukshetra, in what the text sets at the transitional moment of the Dvapara Yuga. Arjuna, son of Kunti, 3rd of the 5 Pandava brothers, the greatest archer of his age, has asked his charioteer Kṛṣṇa to drive the chariot between the 2 armies so he can survey the field. What he sees there breaks him. His kinsmen on both sides, his teachers, his cousins, his grief and confusion resolve into a paralysis that the Gita names with careful precision. Karpanya dosha, the defect of self-pity, and moha, delusion, specifically delusion about his own identity and about the nature of what stands before him. He drops his bow. Kṛṣṇa's response, across the 18 chapters that follow, is not primarily consolation. It is an epistemological correction, a systematic dismantling of the false identity Arjuna has constructed. The 2nd chapter, known as Sankhya Yoga or Jnana Yoga, contains in compressed form what the entire Gita will unfold. And scholars have noted that chapter 2 may in fact be a summary of the whole scripture, because it touches every essential concept the text will develop. By chapter 4, Kṛṣṇa is explicit about what the fire of this knowledge does. In verse 4.37 he says, Yatai tamsi samiddo agnir bhasmasat kurute Arjuna. Jnanagniha sarva karmani bhasmasat kurute tata. Just as a kindled fire reduces logs to ashes, so does the fire of knowledge reduce all actions to ashes. The image is of Jnanagni, the fire of knowledge, and what it burns is not the actions themselves, but the residual imprints, the samskaras, the accumulated weight of identification with outcomes that generates further bondage. The mechanism is not suppression. The fire does not smother the wood. It consumes it entirely, leaving nothing to perpetuate the cycle. Then in 4.38, the doctrinal summit of the chapter, Nahi jnānena sadrisham pavitramiha vidyate. Here in this world, there is no means of purification similar to knowledge. And the verse that follows, 4.39, names what qualifies a person to receive it. Shraddhavan labate jnanam tatpara sanyatendriya. The one who has shraddha, faith, a trusting orientation toward the teaching, who is wholly devoted to it, and who has governed the senses, this person obtains knowledge, and having obtained it, quickly attains param shantim, supreme peace. The word shraddha here is important and often misread. It is not blind belief. The Sanskrit root carries a sense of placing the heart towards something. It is the willingness to remain inside a question long enough for a deeper answer to form. Arjuna has this, despite his collapse. His grief is not weakness without content. Underneath it is a genuine desire to do right, and that desire, Kṛṣṇa recognizes, is precisely the shraddha that makes him capable of receiving the teaching. This matters because in the tradition's own framing, jnana yoga requires preparation. Ādi Śaṅkara, the 8th century systematizer of Advaita Vedanta, and the Viveka Chudamani attributed to him, articulate a fourfold preparation called sadhana katushtaya. 4 qualifications without which the teaching cannot take root. First, viveka, the trained capacity to distinguish between what is nitya, permanent and unchanging, and what is anitya, passing and impermanent. Second, vairagya, a loosening of dependence on external gain. Not hatred of the world, but a natural disenchantment born of clear seeing, a recognition that no object, however desirable, can complete the self. Third, shat sampat, a 6-fold inner discipline that includes shama, the quieting of the mind, and dhamma, the restraint of the senses. And fourth, mumukshutva, the burning desire for liberation, for moksha, from the constriction of ignorance. Śaṅkara describes its necessary intensity in arresting terms, like a drowning man's longing for air. Consider someone sitting with an aging parent whose memory is dissolving, a grown child who has driven that same road every Saturday for 2 years, who watches a person they have known their whole life become, week by week, someone else. The grief of it is not one thing. There is love in it, and exhaustion, and sometimes a sorrow so close to resentment that it frightens them. But underneath all of that is a question that the grief is carrying. Who am I in relation to this person who is changing? And what is the part of them, of us, that does not change? That question, arriving unbidden in an ordinary Saturday afternoon, is what the tradition calls the first movement of viveka. Not a philosophical exercise, a recognition forced upon the heart by loss itself. Śaṅkara makes one further point that Anantanand Rambachand's scholarship draws out carefully. That for Śaṅkara, jnana comes from inquiry into scripture, shastra-centric inquiry, and not primarily from samadhi or meditative absorption alone. Yoga and meditation can quiet the mind. But knowledge of Brahman, in Śaṅkara's view, requires engagement with the Shruti, the revealed texts. This is why the 3 operative practices of jnana yoga, rooted in the Muṇḍaka Upaniṣad's 4th chapter, are Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana, hearing the teaching from an authoritative source, thinking it through with sustained reflection until its logical contradictions are resolved, and then contemplating it until it becomes the ground of one's actual experience rather than a held belief. In chapter 13 of the Gita, Arjuna himself formulates the central discriminative inquiry explicitly. He asks Kṛṣṇa to explain kshetra, kshetrajna, jnāna, and jnana, the field, the knower of the field, knowledge, and what is to be known. Kṛṣṇa answers in 13:2, Idam shariram kaunteya, kshetram iti abhihidyate, etat yo veti tam prahu, kshetrajna iti tatvidaha. This body, O son of Kunti, is called the field, and one who knows it is called the knower of the field. And kshetra here is far more than the physical body. It includes the mind, the intellect, the ego, all the apparatus of material energy. The kshetrajna, the knower, is the witness awareness that cannot itself become an object of knowledge, because it is the very faculty by which all objects are known. The practice of viveka, applied here, is the ongoing act of noticing. This sensation arises and passes. I am the one who notices. This thought arises and passes. I am the one who notices. This grief arises and passes. There is a person who has spent years in a marriage that quietly fell apart, not through any single betrayal, but through the slow accumulation of small distances. The papers are signed. The house is sold. They sit one evening in an apartment that is technically their own and notice, for the first time in perhaps a decade, a quality of stillness beneath the pain. Not happiness, not even relief, something prior to both. That recognition that the one who grieves is not identical with the grief is the first fragile moment of what the 13th chapter is pointing toward. Kṛṣṇa closes chapter 4 with a verse that brings the entire arc of this teaching to a single imperative. In 4:42, Tasmad agyana samputam, hritstam jnānasina atmana, chitva enam samshayam, yogam atishta, uttishta bharata. Therefore, having severed this doubt, born of ignorance, residing in your heart, with the sword of self-knowledge, resort to the discipline of action. Arise, the sword is jñānasi. What it cuts is samshaya, doubt, specifically the doubt that lives not in the head, but hritstam, in the heart. And the doubt it cuts is not intellectual uncertainty about facts. It is the foundational confusion about who is acting, who suffers, who endures. What to carry forward into your actual day? Jnana Yoga begins not with a philosophy, but with an honest recognition that more information, more accomplishment, more of what you already have, will not finally resolve the question your life is quietly asking. The Muṇḍaka tells us Śaunaka already knew everything his world called knowledge, and still he walked into the forest to ask. The first movement is simply to notice what category your restlessness belongs to, and to begin, even tentatively, the turn toward a different order of inquiry.